Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. Michael Gelb started his professional career as, of all things, a juggler. He actually juggled on stage with Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones. However, it was that skill that opened up a whole new world of thinking that led to him becoming the world's leading authority on the application of genius to personal and organizational development. Michael is a speaker, executive coach, and author who's written 16 books that have been translated in more than 25 languages and sold over 1 million copies. And this fall, he'll release a new book co-authored with our friend Raj Sisodia. It's called The Healing Organization, Awakening the Conscience of Business to Help Save the World. You might remember Raj as the co-author of our CEO, Bob Chapman's book, Everybody Matters. And when it gets closer to the release date of The Healing Organization, we'll have both Raj and Michael on to talk about the book. But for now, we wanted to talk to Michael about his more than 40-year career of facilitating creativity in people and organizations, and how that translates into a more fulfilling workplace where everyone feels like they matter. Michael's application of genius thinking to leadership development can be found in many of his books, and we're going to start this episode out by talking about how the conditions under which the aha or eureka moment of genius thinking happens. So here's Michael Gelb.
Let me put it this way. It doesn't happen when people are sitting at their desk. It doesn't happen at the office. It almost always happens when people are in a receptive state, when they're in nature, when they're eureka happened in the bathtub. And actually, one of the questions I've asked people around the world for many years, I always ask my students around the world, I say, where are you physically located when you get your very best ideas? Let me ask you, where are you physically located when you get your best ideas?
For me, it's when I go for a run.
Lovely. Well, the number one answer around the world is in the shower, resting in bed, out for a walk or a run, meditating, driving. When relaxed drive, when you're just in cruise control, kind of. Almost no one says they get their best ideas in the workplace or the office, but that's okay, because in the workplace, the office, your brain is in beta state. It's active. It's processing information. It's stimulating the mind, which is obviously necessary for a creative breakthrough. But the breakthroughs almost invariably happen when we are in a receptive, relaxed state. We now know that the brain waves shift to alpha or theta. They're slower brain waves. We are not in our normal verbal inner chatter mind. We're in a more quiet, receptive, relaxed state. So, one of the simplest applications of this that I've been getting my clients to do all over the world for years is integrate breaks into your workday and think of the breaks as part of optimizing work. So it's not, okay, now we're working and now we're not working. It's now we're actively at our desk or at our machine or at our station. And then when we shift out of that, we are shifting into a mode to replenish our energy, to revitalize ourselves. So we come back refreshed, focused, better able to do the actual active part of the work, but also more likely to get a new or integrating idea when we're in the rest modality. So this the ability to shift, to oscillate between intense focus and relaxation. And by the way, the first person to promote this in an organizational environment was Thomas Edison. Edison used to take a nap on his desk in his laboratory twice a day. We have a photo in the book, Innovate Like Edison, of him asleep on his desk. He used to use Watt's Dictionary of Chemistry as a pillow. And his coworkers swear that every time he would wake up from a nap, he knew even more about chemistry. Edison there was a fishing hole not far from his laboratory, and he built an electric rail car so that his workers, when they needed a break, could just take the little rail car to the fishing hole. Edison himself would use it, and he would fish with a baitless hook because it wasn't about catching fish. It was about being open to new ideas, and he knew that getting out of the office, being in nature, would free his mind and help him generate the ideas that led to the 1,093 individual United States patents that he has.
Just in terms of the principles of creativity, how can that help a person working in a cube or a desk? How can trying to apply those principles to every day help make their lives better or make their work better?
At Barry-Wehmiller, we want people to feel engaged and to feel like they have a voice. And everybody matters. So we want to listen to people, and we want them to feel inspired if they see a way that we can do things that's going to improve our service or our product, that's going to improve the quality of life of the people in the workplace. We want them to feel open to share it. And if people aren't invited to think creatively about how to improve, continuous improvement means you come to work every day with, how do we do it better today? What haven't we thought of? What are we missing? What are we doing that isn't necessary? But this, by the way, is the first principle for thinking like Leonardo da Vinci, which is to awaken your curiosity. So when you have a workplace, when part of your workplace culture is that everyone is curious, genuinely curious, not trying to get brownie points or get a bonus or be recognized for, but no, we actually come to work every day and we're thinking, how can we improve this? How can we make it easier? One of the people we interviewed for the healing organization, they used to run this call center company, and it's to be a frontline call center person was a pretty brutal thing. You're just basically dealing all day long with disgruntled people, and so they started, and they had 100. The turnover in this company was lower than the industry average. The industry average is 150% turnover. Okay, what does that mean? It means everybody leaves, and then half the people leave again every year. Right? It's pretty awful. I mean, and this company was better than most. They only had 120% turnover. Okay, wow, yay us. And in the book, we talk about a lot of the things that they began to do, because what happened was, the leader of this company just woke up. He had an awakening of conscience, and he realized, his own equivalent of the precious child awareness. And one of the initiatives that he began at the company was he got every manager to go to every frontline worker every single day and ask them, is there anything that I can do to improve your experience of working here today? And, like the first day they asked this question, all the people said, yeah, can you please get us better chairs? Because they had horrible chairs. Most of them had backaches. Try being nice to a disgruntled caller when you have a backache. They changed out the chairs immediately. Now, besides the fact that this helped the backaches of the people who were on the front lines, it was the first time anybody ever asked them what they needed. And the fact that it was addressed began to change the entire culture of the company. And turnover went down to 18%. Now, the great thing is they didn't do it as a tactic to reduce turnover and improve ROI. Those were just, as we see, those are epiphenomena. Those are just byproducts of caring for people and being responsive and thoughtful and just curious about how can I make your experience of working here better. I get people to ask every day, how can we make our lives more beautiful? So I'll give you these, and this sounds so artistic and creative, but let's talk about how this relates to real practical business applications. I was working with a VA hospital, and I asked them this question: what can you do to make your life and the lives of people you interact with more beautiful? And I put them in small groups, and they're talking about this, and this one group was just so excited. This group of nurses, and they were in charge of a PTSD ward. And they said, we just had an epiphany. He said, because we realized that the veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder are coming into the waiting room of our area of the hospital. And they come into the waiting room, and CNN is on the television. So they're looking up and they're seeing who got run over, what got blown up, what disaster, scandal, and misery happened today. And, we just have the newspapers there. And they just realized that it was not a beautiful experience to walk into their waiting room. So they got all excited about making their waiting room beautiful. And they came up with a plan to get rid of the news, obviously. That's the first thing for all of us to do.
Yes.
The news. Just do the minimum you have to do to keep up with major world events and delete everything else. You will have. I actually told this to a CEO that I coach, and he said it's freed up more of his energy to actually lead his company because he was just reading the news and worrying and feeling anxious. I said, just cut it out. Have 3 minutes, headlines, anything that's important. Move on and run your life. Anyway, so they got rid of the news from the waiting room. They decided that they would make it a really beautiful environment. They put up poster art exhibitions with themes. They put in aromatherapy. They realized lavender is a healing scent, and they put it in the waiting room. They put flowers in. And the best thing about this is obviously, they're supposed to be running a place that's healing veterans, and so it's pretty obvious that you'd like the healing to start when they get into the waiting room. But the energy that they got out of it, the feeling of healing themselves, of feeling that they were coming to a more beautiful place. So these are little things, none of which cost any significant investment, but upgrade the level of well-being and energy that people have. And when people, well-being is often thought of as something that's like a nice thing to do. It's like corporate social responsibility or checking a few boxes on the environment. But people are not seeing the big picture. Well-being is energy. And energy is what gets the job done. It's what makes work happen. And there's absenteeism, which we're all familiar with, which costs companies a fortune. But there's also presentism, which is your body is there, but your heart and your mind aren't. So how do you make work? That's the other thing too. Is I get people to let go of this out of date notion of work-life balance. That somehow your work and your life are separate things. For much of your adult life, you're going to spend a significant amount of it at work. It better be a meaningful part of your life. So how do we make it more meaningful? How do we connect the way it can be more meaningful, it doesn't mean you have to be doing something where the product itself is meaningful. You can do it by enriching the lives of the people you interact with every day, even the smallest thing. So we now know that emotions are contagious. So even your smile, your kindness, you get coffee for somebody, you open a door for somebody, you get something for somebody, you anticipate somebody's need to do something for them. You are making your life more meaningful and enriching their life every single day. So these small acts of kindness, there's a lot of research on just how powerful they are to create, again, more being, more energy, more fulfillment, more happiness, more quality in what we do.
Yeah, we say that all culture is local. It matters how I treat the people that are in my span of care. And I realize that, and also it goes both ways too. The way they treat me, it is the people that sit the closest to me that create the culture of my work. And we teach that all the time. It's like, think about how your actions impact the lives of the people right in front of you. And that doesn't cost anything.
That's right. It doesn't cost anything. And most people underestimate the influence that they have. They think, well, just how the boss is. And, everybody looks to see is the boss smiling, is the boss frowning. But that's an outdated way of thinking about things and an inefficient way of thinking about things. Instead, we create this situation where people realize that, well, hey, to coin a phrase, everybody matters. Your influence matters. Your smile matters. Your energy matters. Your presence matters. Your creative ideas matter. And we want you to share them, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Your idea about emotions being contagious, that's from one of your most recent books, The Art of Connection, which seems to kind of, be another step along the way to the newest book, The Healing Organization. Talk a little bit about why writing a book like The Art of Connection was important, why cultivating relationships was important to amplify some of the other things that you've written about.
Having written these books about creativity and innovation, Da Vinci and Edison, I wrote another one called Creativity on Demand. And I'm known mostly, I get invited to do these keynotes and seminars and consulting for companies on creativity and innovation. But rather, I'm more than just a keynote speaker or a seminar leader. I've really partnered with companies through most of my career. In some of my longest client, I think I worked with them for 18 or 19 years. I was on retainer to one client for 18 until they retire. And I've had other clients for 5 years, 8 years, 9 years, significant periods of time where I've helped them really build cultures that are much more conducive to innovation, where I call it innovation literacy, where everyone understands how to be creative, the phases of the innovation process, the most efficient tools for generating and organizing new creative ideas, even how to communicate those ideas. But in working organically with companies to really make this happen, the missing link is relationships. It's actually easy. It's pretty easy. I can teach you how to generate more ideas in less time. I can teach you how to make connections between them. I can give you all sorts of practical tools for being a more creative thinker. I can teach you the phases of the innovation process. That's relatively easy to learn. The challenging element in making this really happen is the art of relationship building. And I noticed that, this has always been a challenge, and it's always been probably the most important element of a healthy organization, but it's become more under stress as a result of people's dependence on electronic media and being on their devices, and kids are growing up learning their conversation skills from Siri and Alexa. So I felt this urgent need to write The Art of Connection and to share the best of what I've learned about, well, how do you cultivate relationships? How do you bring out the best in other people? How can you really be a good listener? How do you resolve conflict intelligently? How can you be someone who is a positive influence on others? How do you cultivate humility so that you're open to learning and change and growth? This is it's a lifetime of passion, interest. I've always been a student of the nature of relationship and how to make the most out of it, because it is so fundamental to our happiness on every level. I mean, the principles of relationship aren't different at work than they are in your marriage, with your children, with your parents, with your friends. So I look to what are the universal principles that make relationships work, and what interferes with relationship working, and I put the best of what I know into this book.
Well, and I think in the book you do say at one point that the art of connection is the secret of health, happiness, and leadership. And what do you mean exactly when you say that?
Well, that's not just my own opinion, although I do think that that's true. That's the conclusion of the world's longest running social psychology study, which is done up in Massachusetts. The current director of the study is a gentleman named Robert Waldinger. And this study began, it's 70 or 80 years ago now. They took a little more than 300 Harvard undergraduates and just over 300 young men of the same age from Roxbury near the Boston area. And they tested them on every metric they could test, their health, and they interviewed them on what they thought would make for a successful and happy life. And as you might imagine, young men thought, well, success measured by my position, wealth, achievements, possessions, and so on. But they checked in with the men every year. They tested them every year. I think it's in the fourth generation, the study now. And they found that the only thing that really mattered was people's sense of loving connection. That was the one correlate with their happiness. It also correlated strongly with their longevity, and, by the way, with their ultimate success in their own self-definition of having a successful life, because they felt lovingly connected to other people.
Gotta ask you about, you were a professional juggler?
That is correct. I worked my way through graduate school as a professional juggler, and it all began when I saw someone juggle, and I just thought it was so beautiful. It looked to me like moving sculpture. And I went to this incredible juggler and I asked him to teach me, but it turns out that he was not as good a teacher as he was a juggler. Because what he told me was, take these 3 balls, throw them up, don't let any of them drop. Right? That's kind of a mistake. That's what a lot of us get as instruction to try to learn. So just do it and don't get it wrong. Well, that's not really very helpful. So I thought there has to be a better way. And at the time I was studying the Alexander technique, which is a marvelous method for developing stage presence. And they teach it at the Juilliard School and the Royal Academy of Music and Drama. I was interested in how stage presence applies in life overall, especially in the context of business and giving presentations and walking into a meeting. So I thought I'll apply what I'm learning about the principles of the Alexander technique, which involve learning how to be balanced and centered and avoid unnecessary energy, continue the flow of your breathing in whatever activity you're engaged in. So I thought I'd apply the Alexander methodology to the task of learning how to juggle. And I created a whole new strategy based on focusing first on one's own balance and not even trying to catch the balls. Instead, focus on throwing the balls to the same place in space every time and let them drop. And eventually, of course, when you relax like that and toss the balls in the same place every time, they start landing in the same place. And all of a sudden, juggling becomes easy. So this really worked. I mean, I became a professional juggler. I juggled 4 balls, 5 balls, flaming clubs. I juggled on stage with Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones at the Nebworth Rock Festival. I juggled Bob Dylan. I used to work at Harvard Square. I once earned $80 in quarters in a couple hours in Harvard Square. It also, this is many, many years ago, but the insights I got into how to learn as I began to be invited to work with companies around the world to create more innovative, cooperative cultures, what would eventually become to be called the Learning Organization, based on Peter Senge's brilliant work. I started using juggling as a metaphor for the process of learning whatever it is you want to learn. And I actually developed this whole corporate program. I once taught 1,000 IBM engineers how to juggle in this big ball. Because what I do is I put them in teams and they pick the balls up for one another. So you're really modeling support and teamwork. And by focusing on the process rather than grasping for the result, you really get the essence of what brings about quality. A quality result is a function of a quality process and open, free communication and collaboration, plus fun, because there's something about learning to juggle that gets people laughing and being more playful and more childlike. So yeah, I turned this into a corporate seminar. I wrote a book about it. It came out in 1994 called Lessons from the Art of Juggling. And I once taught Joan London how to juggle live on Good Morning America.
Well, so how did it come about that you started working with organizations to help inspire creativity and work with leadership? How did that come about? Was it kind of a linear process from your studies and from your juggling career? How did that all come about?
It was a wildly nonlinear process.
As all the best are.
Yeah. I only had 2 criteria for what I would do. One is that it had to be something that would be healing or helpful to others. And the other was it would have to be something that would be healing and helpful to me to learn about. Believe it or not, I actually moved to Washington, D.C. because I thought it was the place where creativity and innovation might be of most service to the world. But I guess no one's too surprised to discover that politicians, government, really, they weren't interested in creativity. They weren't that interested in innovation. I actually put on these public seminars, 3-day programs called High Performance Learning. But the programs were full. We used to have waiting lists from business people who were really interested in creativity and accelerated learning and innovation. And they began engaging me to work with their companies to help them develop cultures that had more creativity and more innovation and where people could accelerate their learning and improve their communication. And then it slowly began to dawn on me that the point of leverage for making a better world would actually be business. That this is where the dynamism was. This is where the real power, money, and influence was. So I formulated a mission very early on to work with companies to help them become more creative, more conscious, and more compassionate. And I've been doing that ever since.
So somewhere along the line, you met up with Conscious Capitalism, and you met up with Raj Sisodia, who's our CEO Bob's co-author and your co-author now. How did that all come about?
Okay, well, in 96, I was still living in DC, even though I was now working primarily with businesses rather than government. And I was invited to lead a series of 3-day seminars at George Mason University as part of their executive MBA program. And the director of that program was Professor Raj Sisodia. Mm-hmm. So Raj attended, I don't know how many sessions I did. I probably did 3, 4, 5, maybe more, probably maybe 6 or 7 of these sessions. for Raj's executive MBA group, and just liked the guy right away, and we stayed in touch. So a number of years later, he sent me the galleys of Firms of Endearment. And I remember reading it and thinking, wow, this guy has made the business case for what I've been kind of doing on my own. I was a solo practitioner. I had this quixotic notion of saving the world through business by making businesses more conscious. And I knew intuitively that was better business. I knew that it had to be better, but I didn't have the proof. Well, here was Raj presenting the evidence.
Without giving anything away, later on down the road, we'll get you and Raj together and we'll talk about the book, The Healing Organization. But how did this road that you've been on lead to that book and that collaboration with Raj?
It's both Raj and I feel this sense of this was a calling, and we felt this was just something that we were really called to do. That it's what the world needs. I mean, this is not a luxury item. We have grave challenges. We have way too many people who are still suffering from opioid addiction and obesity and domestic violence. We have environmental issues. We have more political divisiveness than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and that includes, the Vietnam War and all the issues back in the 70s. So how are we going to deal with this? I don't think government's going to come up with the solution. And I don't think I think it's an outdated idea that if you want to do good in the world, go work for a nonprofit or a foundation. That's not, it's a wonderful thing to do. And I'm support the efforts of real leaders within government from whatever party to address these important issues. But Raj and I both feel strongly that it's only business that's really going to get it done. Mm-hmm. And that we're at a time where it's just so fascinating because people are saying, things are worse than ever. Well, no, actually, they're not. The work of Steven Pinker shows that despite everything, things are getting better for more people than they ever have been. But that doesn't take away the fact that they're also worse for too many people. So how are we going to address the needs of those, the vast numbers of people who are still living in poverty, who don't have enough to eat, who are, sadly, of course, the people who are most affected by environmental degradation are those who can least afford to be affected by it. So how do we address all these issues? We leverage the power of business. See, it used to be, people didn't used to know. We talk a lot about this in part one of the new book, that the old model was expressed by Andrew Carnegie. It's called Carnegie's dictum. And it really was the best thinking of a previous generation. And it was, Carnegie said, in the first third of your life, get the best education you can. He said, in the second third of your life, make as much money as you can. He said, in the third part of your life, give away as much as you can. Because the operating assumption at Carnegie's time was that in order to make money, you had to do what he did and exploit workers, destroy the planet. I'm sure if Carnegie were alive today, he'd be the first to embrace the healing organization. he was a visionary guy. He wanted to make the world a better place. He just didn't really know. And the consciousness of the time was such that the cutthroat competition between Carnegie and Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, I mean, it was a different era. And plus, at that time, it also seemed that, these fossil fuel type resources were unlimited and knock yourself out. Well, we've knocked ourselves out. So we're in a different time. And now we know, thanks largely to the research by Raj in Firms of Endearment and many other wonderful researchers and thinkers who recognize this, that there's a new model. Not only can you do well by doing good, you'll do better by doing good. You'll do it more sustainably. You don't have to harm others, harm the planet, and then try to make up for it by giving stuff away. You can bring out the best in people. You can create a beautiful organization. You can make a difference for people. You can be a healer in the process of generating tremendous wealth and tremendous abundance. And then you can share that too.
If you'd like to find out more about Michael Gelb, especially leading up to the release of he and Raj Sisodia's new book, The Healing Organization, go to michaelgelb.com. That's michaelgelb.com. You can also find him on Twitter @Michael Gelb. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For more updates on the book, this podcast, and a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter @Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook, LinkedIn. Check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. And don't forget that Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited